Welcome to another episode of the Herrera Health and Wellness Podcast. I'm here with none other than David Amerland, author, martial artist, marketer, strategist. I don't know how you make time for all of this, David, but I respect it. Now,
I don't get
am,
out much, yeah.
am I saying this correctly? 19. Wait, am I getting this right? 19 books?
Yes, indeed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, is it safe to say that most of your work is in the marketing strategist field?
Most of it is, yeah. The last three books have increasingly gone into the field of neuroscience and the science behind human behavior. And it's sort of heading that way for now.
So you have Built to Last, which is your most recent book,
Mm.
and you have Sniper Mind, and what is the third one that's kind of gearing toward the neuroscience
It's
and human
it's
behavior?
intentional.
Intentional. That's the name of the
Yeah.
book?
Yeah.
Okay, I definitely got to check that one out. I really enjoy your book. I'm actually almost finished. I really enjoy it. It
Thank
says a
you.
lot. It says a lot. It describes a lot. It kind of there's a lot of things in the book that I can resonate with, and that's stuff that I do want to get into. But
Mhm.
how did you? I heard you on a podcast. You were talking about how you basically didn't know what you wanted to do, and you got into. I think you study mechanical engineering,
And it's
correct?
chemical engineering.
Now, how you mentioned something about not knowing who you are, figuring out who you are first in order to know exactly what you want from life. So, is it safe to say at that point in your life you weren't sure of who you were, and that's why you kind of took that route of basically whatever's there?
Yeah. Like everybody else, you're trying to figure out life and it's not easy. There's no menu. So you need to try and do things. I have a serious issue. So I try to keep my options open and I'm really sort of not comfortable committing for long term to anything. Chemical engineering at the time offered me so many different avenues. I felt I could just cherry pick what I liked. So I went all in on that.
Okay, I'm sorry, I said mechanical engineering, so it's chemical engineering.
Yeah.
And how did you get into the field of marketing and strategy and helping companies with SEO and search and all that beautiful stuff that you study?
Well, chemical engineering has a foundation in mathematics. A lot of things need to be modeled first in order to be understood. So then you can sort of correlate to what's happening in the real world. Search is based on maths. And that sort of is a connection for me. That's how I got into it.
Okay.
And I had an affinity for it. I discovered that, first of all, I liked it. But the most important thing is I actually understood it and
Okay.
sort of things took off.
Oh, well, fair enough. And that's what made you successful, and that's kind of what made you want to branch out into your last three projects. And you also have the blog where you mentioned about, expanding outside of what you've
Mm.
originally been doing and why basically. I definitely encourage people to go check out the blog and specifically that article. I enjoyed that one because we stay
Thank you.
stuck in one thing, and
Mm.
it becomes tedious and redundant and you have to expand. You're pretty much still in the same field, but just expanding and seeing what else is out there. Now, I want to go back to how everything started because I heard you on a podcast. You mentioned how when you were young, you moved around a lot. And
Mhm.
same thing with me. I moved around a lot. Like I've been to about three elementary schools, three high schools. I was never really in one place. So let's go
It's
back to
brutal,
you.
right? It's brutal.
It's rough, and like you said, it could shape your behavior.
Yeah.
Uh, Struggling to make friends, consistent friends, and so on. But go ahead and tell me what your childhood was like, growing up, your family dynamic, and why you moved around so much.
Well, my parents moved because of work primarily, and I was sort of changed states. I was in Australia. So you move states, you basically change culture. Um, and it becomes really difficult for a young child. You have no friends. You're always the new kid on the block when it comes to school. You're always the outsider when it comes to the local culture. So you have to really try and fit in, and it's not easy because you're trying to work things out and you're changing inside yourself. So you're
Mhm.
struggling with who you are. And your parents are too busy to actually, they're too busy working to actually pay much attention to you. So you're kind of bringing yourself up, and it's really, really difficult. And it does things to your head. The pressure builds up. You feel very angry towards the world. And you have to deal with that. And there's the ways that we deal with these things traditionally is, you sort of get engaged in antisocial behavior. You try to hurt yourself, to hurt others, or you find something to channel it into. And I was just lucky, fortuitously. I came across a community center and I did karate and I joined and I loved it. I loved the discipline. My head stopped sort of being chaotic. It cleared up my thinking and
Bef-
sort of things took off from there. So,
Before you got into martial arts, though, and you had that mindset where you were kind of antisocial, were you ever rebelling, getting into trouble?
oh yeah, all the time. Absolutely. And in some ways, I've never stopped, right? It's just that I do it in more acceptable ways these days.
And so how did you fall into martial arts? And I'm a novice Muay Thai practitioner. I know you
Mhm.
practice intermediately Muay Thai. You have you're a Taekwondo instructor. Let me read this: Taekwondo instructor, a second degree black belt in ITF Taekwondo,
Mhm.
a black belt in WTF Taekwondo.
Yep,
You have a black belt in Wado Ryu Karate,
that's right.
and you're training in Kung Fu and Muay Thai, like we said before. Now,
Yep.
how did you stumble into this community center? Did you just walk in one day and tell me how
Well,
that
yeah,
happened?
see, okay, when I'm 60 now, so it's the 70s, right? And there's
Okay.
Bruce Lee crazy zone. So, I walked in and I saw the class, and it seemed something like I would like to try it. So I spoke to one of the instructors, and he said, why don't you come the next day? And I did. And, in those days, teaching, for better or worse, was a little bit less structured than it is today. Instructors were a little bit rough and ready. They didn't have a necessary, to get to become a Taekwondo, a certified Taekwondo instructor, I actually had to take and pass a specific course after I took my second degree black belt. And people fail that. So you actually have to really try hard. You have to put a curriculum together. You have to address different learning needs. There's a whole lot of science that goes into it. But back then we had none of those things. You had a black belt, you taught. And the way you taught was the way you felt. And sometimes people felt like, okay, you made a mistake. I'm going to come over and kick you. And you paid the money for that, right?
Yeah, yeah, you're getting paid to get your
It
ass
kind of
kicked.
appealed to me though, because, the kind of very direct approach kind
I
of
think
sharpens your mind. You don't want to make too many mistakes.
I
So I
think
liked it.
I think it kind of resonated with your rebellious mindset, your antisocial mindset. I think you needed that in your life at that time, at that
Quite
point in your life,
possibly.
you
I mean,
know?
it's crazy. When you look back on it, you think, what? Really?
I
And
mean,
we had this kind of teaching thing where, the class lined up, and if anybody made a mistake, everybody did push-ups. And then the person who actually made the mistake also got kicked.
so the person that made a mistake got the push-ups along with the class and got
Yes.
kicked. So
Yes.
there's my Muay Thai coach is he's old school. He's a black belt in Taekwondo. He competed. Uh, he says the same thing. How back then it was so much different, and
Yeah.
he tries to use the old school method on the modern classes, the today's classes. They don't they don't always work. I don't
No.
know why,
No.
but now you you had trouble with your social skills because you were always moving around. You couldn't make any friends.
Mm.
Did 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 martial arts help change that? Just your whole outlook and aspect on.
Somewhat. Yes. I mean, it doesn't make you necessarily more sociable instantly, but it makes you more sure of yourself, more confident. And then the key thing is it gives you structured thinking, because you can't really change on the outside unless you change on the inside. And the inside change that happens is that you begin to sort of put things together. And if it's something is complex, you take it apart. And that gives you a handle in situations which are unfamiliar with or you're an outsider of. It allows you, if you want to, and with some effort, to fit in a little bit better. So it's worth the effort. And it becomes that key.
And you took that along with you as you got older and you got into your career paths. And what was your strategy as far as becoming successful in the field as a marketer and strategist?
Well,
Your personal
interesting, Nick.
strategy in the
Yeah,
mind.
absolutely.
Hmm.
Here's what it is. This is what I do. Most people look at the problem and try to find solutions. And what I do is I try to understand the problem. And my thinking is if I understand the problem, then most of the time it will show me the solution that works. So I don't have to be really innovative as long as I truly understand what it is that I'm seeing. And if you apply this to anything, relationships, life, marketing, writing, whatever it is you're actually doing, then you begin to see the patterns that emerge. And some of those patterns are fundamental. So the knowledge that you take from one context can be applied to the other. It works in martial arts as well. You have a sparring situation, it's essentially a puzzle. What you have to do, and you have very limited time. You need to very quickly make some assumptions, understand what the problem is, and try to apply that solution really quickly.
But you make it seem so easy because like someone like me, like I you just so many different styles of companies, right? What can I do to make this company successful, right? You
Mm.
mentioned AI as one of those things, right? So how would a company use something like AI to succeed and expand and grow?
Most companies look at AI as a way to help them reduce operating costs. And for that, they're looking the same way that they looked at computers. When computers first came on, they wanted to shed some stuff because people are expensive, people are difficult to manage, people are difficult to be consistent in their
Yeah.
output, and they want to get a machine to do their job. And that was back in the 80s and 90s, primarily the 90s. We're now 30 odd years forward, and they're making the same mistake with AI.
Hmm.
And a company that actually truly wants to take advantage of AI will find ways that will shorten the amount of time that its staff is spending at dumb jobs. There are some jobs that people do because they have no choice, but they're intellectually stupid. Number crunching, sort of data analysis, going through data sets, picking out patterns, that kind of thing. And machines are really, really good at that. So if they actually put AI to work in that context, they're enabling their people to be people. What do we do as people? We are innovative, we're creative, we're curious, and we take things to the next level in a way that actually makes sense to the target audience.
And all of this is going to boil down to your way of thinking, right? Your human behavior,
Mm,
and that's something that you're big on, and that's something
mm.
you dive into. Now, why is this? Why do you think in today's world, right, in this digital era, technology driven era, so many things that we consume, so much consumption, why do you think we struggle in today's world to get things done or to socialize or to just move our bodies to work out, to eat right, sleep right, right? Those are your four steps to
Mm.
great brain health, right? Why do we
Yeah,
struggle with that in today's age?
it's a basic thing, or two basic things. The first one is we get distracted by what's in front of us,
Hmm.
and we tend to think that actually that will help us do something, and we forget why it is that we actually want to do that thing in the first place. And that's part of the problem. And then we forget to also ask truly who we are in that context, as in, who do we think we are? How do we fit in that situation? And then again, why do we want to do some things? As long as we understand our who, our head is clear, we understand our reasoning, and then the why itself becomes clear. That clarity of thinking at a physical level becomes an operational shortcut. It gives us more energy to do the things we actually do. And again, you apply to your sparring. If you have sparred with somebody and you kind of know their style, you already halfway there in what you're going to do and how you're going to tackle it. And if you don't know them at all, they're a puzzle. You have to try and figure it out. And there's no shortcut to this. You have to put in some time, maybe to have a longer sparring session, maybe have 2 or 3 before you begin to handle them, depending on how good they are at hiding what they do. So it's the same in business, same principle. You look at the patterns, you try to understand what is observational for you and what is fundamental, what's actually behind it. And the moment you get to the fundamentals, that's when the problem begins to become clearer, and then the solutions present themselves.
Beautiful. Now you also you mentioned this, the mindset, human behavior, and in the sniper mind, basically comparing civilians to like military and how their way of thinking. Can you elaborate on how can one succeed by thinking like a soldier?
Like a sniper. Yes.
A sniper, yeah.
Well, Sniper Mind came out in 2016 and it took 3.5 years to write.
Wow.
And I interviewed 100 snipers, most of them active, a few retired, from 3 different military organizations. And I had about just over 300 interview hours with them. And I went through about 10,000 hours of studies. And the reason we chose snipers as the primary subject was that at the time, we were beginning to get portable fMRI machines, which is functional magnetic resonance imaging, which allowed people to wear them and move about, and then it allowed us to see the human brain as it thought during critical times under pressure. And what became apparent, because these are highly trained subjects, but at the same time, they're human, just like us. They feel uncertainty and fear. They get tired. They get confused, and they need to bring everything back together and clear their head. And what we actually discovered, was that the framework that they actually employed to allow them to operate at such a high level of efficiency was based on the fundamental ability to acknowledge and then regulate their emotional response. And what that does at a physical level, it allows us to bring down our levels of anxiety. It allows us to bring down the level of stress we have. And immediately those 2 things from an energetic point of view from the body, because stress and anxiety consume energy, frees up a little bit more energy, which then can be allocated to the problem at hand. But the most important thing is that if we allow stress and anxiety to take over, the brain senses that a threshold is reached, and once that threshold is reached, it deems that this is a threat. And when it sees as a threat, it goes into reactive mode, which is survival mode, and it shuts down the higher centers of the brain, which are used in critical thinking because they are energetically expensive. And it prepares the body for action, which is not going to take place because usually we're in an office environment. So that simple thing, the ability to regulate our emotions, opens up all the resources which we actually need to solve a problem. And if we fail to do that, then we can look at the facts in front of us, and we are a little bit dumber than before because we don't have the critical ability to actually put the things together and navigate the situation. We feel overwhelmed. We feel panic rising inside us. So that was the primary thing that came out of that book.
Wow. I think I'm gonna purchase this book as soon as we get off the chat. So of that study, because that's amazing. I never knew something like that existed. What was the most astonishing thing when like basically looking at a sniper's brain? What was the most astonishing thing to you?
Well, there are 2 things, or actually 3. And here's what they are. The first thing is that they are constantly reliving their past successes and their past failures, running scenarios in their head, picking them apart and saying what went right, what went wrong, what could they improve. And what that does is it allows them to have all these possible scenarios for a fresh operation, a fresh kind of scenario, a fresh situation they haven't met before. And instead of feeling unprepared, they actually, because they have run those things, they're ready to move into the flow of action that's required. And if you think about it, let's say somebody invites you to a party, a couple of people are going to be there, and you kind of know them and you don't know anybody else. So you feel this uncertainty inside you. You're going to be, oh, the old person now. And then you think, maybe I'll see this person if I do this, what I'm going to do. You run those scenarios. Why? You're trying to prepare yourself. And if you don't prepare yourself, everything happens, the part is going to kind of surprise you. And your behavior is going to be a bit off because you're trying to sort of process the surprise you feel, process the facts around you, and then try to work out how you should behave, which is crazy, but that's what's happening. So they do that. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
The second thing they do is that they exercise empathy. Now, empathy is really necessary because it allows us to not just understand how somebody feels, but feel how they feel. And this is crazy, right? Because the snipers, which ultimately at some point they're going to kill somebody in an operation. They need that because usually when they're active in that scenario, they have to be able to predict their potential target's movements. Because the distances are such that if you're chasing the target, you're going to miss. And a lot of the times they actually place a shot technically in the future where the target is actually going to be, not where they are. And that, it's almost magical the way they do that. But this is how they do it. They truly empathize with other people, and they can predict in different scenarios their behavior with a high degree of accuracy. And it sounds really terrible in this context because obviously the outcome is lethal, but it shows the power of empathy to actually allow us to navigate correctly different situations and operate at a high level of efficiency because we understand what is happening around us from other people. So this is something they develop. And the third thing, of course, is that they're really, really good at controlling the fear that they feel. They feel fear, they feel uncertainty. And the way they do that is by using simple techniques like breathing exercises to bring down the physiological responses to intense arousal because of fear and control the body's physiological sort of functions so they don't get too excited. They don't panic. They don't kind of allow their fear or their emotions to control them.
Wow. That's amazing. Now, would you say, is it safe to say an empathetic person is more likely to know how to react in certain situations because they understand the other person's side? Yeah.
Yeah. Most of the times when we don't know how to react to another person, it's because we don't understand them. But when we say we don't understand them, is we don't understand their motivation. We don't understand their actions. And this is what we're trying to figure out. What are they about? What are they trying to do? If we can understand them, then we understand partially their intent. And then we can navigate the situation with more surety from our part, because we can then make a judgment call. We can either accept what they're doing and we help them, or not accept what they're doing and not help them, or walk away, whatever the context is.
It's crazy because in today's world, it's so much more challenging because let's get back to the human behavior part, because you have so many things, this younger generation, you have so many influencers and people and entertainment telling them what to do, who to be, how to act, even what gender you should, just things like that. It's just, how do you navigate that in today's world?
Well, it appears difficult because of the choice and the complexity and the noise that surrounds everything.
A lot.
But again, it comes down to that clear understanding of who you are and what you're doing, which is, it's easy to say, we both know from experience, it's really difficult to get up. It takes a lot of work. It's painful looking inside yourself. It's difficult accepting some truths about you and then trying to work them through. But if you know who you are, then you begin to understand why you do some things, what it is that drives you. And this is a fluid situation. Who we are changes over time because our memories change, our knowledge changes, definitely our experiences change, and our understanding of of the identity we have also changes. It becomes different because the perspective changes. But if we have that insight at all times, then we have clarity. And we have clarity that the things that drive us, all of us, in any context, at any time, are fundamental. We go back to the Roman Empire. We go back to the year, I don't know, 400 AD, which is like 1500 years ago, over 1500 years ago. And we'll see some complexity there in that society, which will astound us. And yet the fundamentals are the same. People want the same things. They want connection. They want to belong. They want to have some kind of meaning in their life. They want to have relationships that make them stronger instead of weaker. They want to have focus in what they do. They want something to believe in because that allows them to do all those things a little bit better. That hasn't changed.
Okay. And you also write about neuroscience.
Yeah.
Study of the brain. Now, how does one kind of slow down everything that's going on in their head and to kind of like just be in the now, in the moment, to kind of process who you are and figure out who you are in order to proceed further?
Excellent question. How do you do that? Well, how do you do anything like this? You need to learn to listen to yourself. We all have a voice inside our head. Most of us, I'm going to take this back. We don't all have a voice inside our head. We now know that there are some people who simply haven't got that inner voice in a specific term from them, which I can't remember now.
Wow.
But yeah, I know it's staggering. But for them, it's silence. There's no voice. But a lot of us have a voice inside our head. So whether we have a voice or not is immaterial. We need to sort of try and work out what is going on inside us. And there are different ways to do it. One is journaling. We can actually write our thoughts down, write our feelings down, and keep on doing that again and again and again until a kind of picture begins to emerge. The other one is to just sit with ourselves in the dark, in a sort of quiet place, and just kind of listen to what's going on inside our head. And this is where the voice bit comes in. If we have it, then we basically talk to it and it talks back. And in that dialogue, we begin to get a sense of some things which are okay and some things which are not so okay. And they're the things we need to focus on. We can try talking to friends, but this is always an iffy proposition because it depends on the kind of friends you have.
Mm-hmm.
But we can try another technique, which is called distancing, which psychologists use. And this is like talking to ourselves in the third person. So if you're to sit in a room and actually talk to yourself in the third person, this is what happens inside your head. First of all, your head now has to model two different kinds of personas. The person who we are inside our body and the person talking to us, which we normally visualize as some invisible entity outside. So the resources are sort of spread between these two things. And whatever anxiety we feel, whatever uncertainty, whatever fear is now dampened because the resources have been split. And that allows a certain clarity to emerge. So that dialogue where you say to yourself, you can do better than this. Why don't you do better than this? And then listen to the voice and say, maybe you don't have what you need. Maybe you don't have the training. Would training help you? It's got to be a kind of voice as opposed to a sergeant major telling you that you're terrible.
Yeah.
But if we try these things, again, what we have through these approaches are tools which allow us to see what's going on inside our head, which is normally invisible. And that really, really helps us understand that aspect of our identity, who we are, what drives us, what's really important to us, what are our values, what are our red lines, how moral are we? And morality is incredibly complex and very, very flexible.
Very.
And usually a creation society. So, these are the questions which, however, allow us to flourish as humans. People who have that kind of understanding, They have this surety about them, the way they move, and the way they think, and the way they make decisions, which stems from that.
Wow. This actually reminds me of a book that I read, The Untethered Soul. Have you read that book? Have you heard of it?
Yes, I have. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of like about clearing the mind. So for me, my approach, for me to clear the mind, it's running and fasting basically. So what's your approach when you want to clear the mind and kind of tell the voice to take a step back while you figure things out?
I get together with a heavy bag
Okay.
for about a couple of hours, and it absolutely wrecks you because it doesn't stop. No matter how you hit it, it's still there and it's still soaking up all the punishment you can give it. So it drains you. And the moment,
Yeah.
you mentioned physicality, right? You go running. Way back when I used to do that, every time I was stressed, I'd go for a run. These days, I use the bag.
Okay.
And what happens is the moment we exhaust the body, the brain is a little bit crisper because in order for us to feel okay after the exertion of exercise, all our baseline readings go down. Our heart rate is lower, our blood pressure is lower, our anxiety as a result of that is lower, cortisol levels in the bloodstream, they're lower. So we are actually operating at quite a high level of optimum efficiency. And that's why I feel so good in terms of the clarity of our thinking. So physicality, using something physical to help us define what we do is really, really good. I listened to David Goggins the other day. He said he hates running. He goes on an ultra marathon and he hates the first 72 miles. He wonders why he's been there. He swears at himself, swears at his wife who made him do that. But he said after the first 72 miles, everything becomes clear and he has all the answers he needs.
You know,
We don't have to be that extreme, but yeah, same principle.
his book is amazing, by the way. If you haven't read it, built
Yeah, I have. Yeah,
Can't
yeah.
Hurt Me. Now,
Yes.
what advice would you have for someone, say for me, for example, I go for a run,
Mm.
I'm clear headed, but when that runner's high, or just that clarity kind of starts to wither away, and all the noise starts to go back, starts to make his way back in there. So, like, what advice would you have for someone like that to kind of combat that?
Okay. There are two ways to approach this, and we'll go to your method, right? You go running. Now, if you go running to exercise your demons, then you go hard. And when you get tired, a couple of things will happen. Either your head will be clear, or you're going to be in a slightly weakened state. The filters you put in place will not be as active, and now those demons will come rushing back. But the thing is, you still have to deal with the physicality of what you're doing. And that requires focus, it requires a certain amount of determination, and definitely it requires effort. And if you focus on that, then those demons go away because you can't do two things. It's the brain's too distracting. So that's an easy way to deal with it. But there's another way. If you go for a run, not to exercise your demons, but to clear your head. Well, a run at any pace, even a walk will do it. And this is where neuroscience comes in. We know that from all the types of exercise we can actually do, walking and running activate the parts of the brain which are analytical, and they create a harmony amongst all different parts of the brain. And what they do is they activate a synchronization, which is called global cognitive function. And no other sport will do that to the same degree. And the reason we have that is because normally in the 10,000-year-old past we all came from, we are walking or running either to get our food or to avoid becoming food. And for that, we need all our faculties. So that contact of our foot on the ground activates that way of thinking and clears our head. So, if we're not expanding all our energy into the motion, but instead are enjoying, a relatively sort of slow run or a walk, then our brain will clear and we'll have a lot of the answers to the problems we're actually dealing with.
Wow. I'm learning a lot. I'm learning a lot here. Now I do want to talk about the book next, but I do have a
Mm,
question because in your blog you
okay.
mentioned in the article why you expanded into a different field, but technically it's the same. You have fiction and storytelling, right? As one
Mm,
of your so can you delve into that for a little bit and tell me like why
absolutely.
fiction
Yeah.
and storytelling?
The human brain, from its architectural point of view, is able to hold on to narratives a lot more easily than it can hold on to facts. And the reason for this is that narratives represent either a reality that is familiar to us or aspects of realities that are different but still familiar to us in relation to our reality. So if somebody tells you a story, whatever you got in your head, street scene, this happens, that happens, this happens because of that. You can still follow it because it's not very different to where you live. And it doesn't matter where you live. So even if it's a story on another planet, you still think, oh yeah, it's just another place, right? And you have houses and you have people and people do these things and this happens. But if I were to give you a bunch of facts, and let's say I give you another planet and tell you about the atmosphere and tell you what it consists of, or tell you about, soil and people and their different neurobiology and explain that in detail so it actually makes sense. And then I'll tell you, because of their different neurobiology, now they have different kind of food and they have different kind of motivation and do all these things. It's interesting and definitely you follow it, but you can't recall it because energetically it's really complex. You'll have to go over it again and again and again and again and learn it. And once you learn it, then you can do it. But that's a lot of work. So that's why I'm exploring fiction as a tool to help us understand better how to function. I wrote a book back in 2014, I think, it was called Trust. And basically it explored how trust is created and then propagated across digital domains so that people can do business with customers they have never met before, and those customers actually trust them. And the book is in two parts. The first part is a narrative where I explore how trust actually works in human interactions and have this tribe of people who go through a particular kind of area and they meet another tribe and they're possibly hostile, and now they have to kind of work it out, right? Do we fight or do we not? And it becomes, and then the second part of the book is all these different types of trust we have. I've broken everything down in detail, amazing amount of research. The book was well received, but months later after it came out, everybody wanted to talk about the tribes people, and I wanted to talk about the second part of the book, which is really technically complex and very, very interesting about the different types of trust and how we break those down. Everybody's going, but why do they do this? And why do they have those fears? And so that actually drove to me that, this is the part they actually liked, and that's the part that actually helped them understand some of the complexities of human behavior around trust. And this is the thing about trust. If it's not there, there's no relational exchange with anybody. If you don't trust me, truly don't trust me, you want nothing to do with me. Because trust essentially is your ability to predict my behavior within certain boundaries if you have never met me before. That's how you trust me. And if you say, oh, I don't trust David, but you still have a connection with me, you don't mean you don't trust me. What you mean is that you can actually calculate how much not to trust me. So there is an amount of trust there
It
in your
may
calculation.
it makes me think about
Because
like
if,
go ahead.
yeah, because if you didn't trust me at all, right? That's it. You have nothing to do with me because you can't predict it. It's unpredictable. You do not want to go into a situation that is unpredictable. That's just asking for trouble.
It's like when a spouse cheats on another spouse, but they stay together like
Yes.
that. They're still together, so there's some trust there, but it's
Yeah.
always going to be that level of I can't trust this person. But that's a
Yeah.
recipe for disaster, isn't it? So when you
It
have
is.
things
I
like that,
mean, yes. When it comes to personal relationships, because the emotions are heightened, the responses are also going to be elevated. And that can cause all sorts of issues because we can easily overreact because we take things very personally, and so we should, because it's they're personal relationships. When it comes to business, however, where we need to be a little bit more level-headed, our ability to trust somebody revolves around so many different factors that we need to actually understand. And even the level of mistrust that we have towards a person can actually be calculated and say, this person will be fine and the relationship will be great until this happens. And then we can't trust their reaction. And you're fine with that because now you're taking a calculated risk.
How does that affect one's brain when they're struggling to trust someone but they still have this person in their life, like as far as like stressors and anxiety and just how does that affect one's brain?
Significantly. If you're in a relationship where trust is an issue, you can never really truly relax. You can never really totally rely on the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And stress is a constant, which means that when things are going okay, both people are on edge. When things are not going okay, one of them is going to fly off the handle because their resources now are just exhausted.
Built to last. What was your motivation and inspiration, right? So how to get stronger, healthier, and happier at every stage of life, right? This is more the human behavior connected to basically the physical body, fitness, etc. What was your inspiration to write this book? What inspired you?
It has a funny origin story, and it's with a pandemic. Now we all had to be on lockdown, and I couldn't train because I couldn't go outside. So I kitted out my house, one room in my house, to a full gym. So I've got a completely full kitted out gym. And I started training, and I've got a friend who also has a home gym, and he lives nearby. And once a week we get together and we'll train together. And when you train with somebody else, what happens? Because you're focusing on the other person and you're not focusing on yourself so much, you can bring the intensity up a little bit. So it becomes a little bit more intense in terms of a session. And secondly, there's a strong social element because you talk to the other person, you exchange information, and then you discuss things. And he would bring all these articles about fitness, some myths we'd look at, and I'll bring in studies to debunk them. And from that conversation over a period of 2 years, Built to Last was born.
It's crazy how things are created. Now, in your book, right, you talk about the 2 hidden enemies, and
yes,
can you elaborate on that? The 2 hidden enemies, because go ahead, because I have other stuff I want to get into within this chapter, but go ahead and talk about these 2 hidden enemies.
The part of us which holds us back is never very clear to us, ever. And usually there are 2 things that hold us back. One is a negative voice in our head that tells us, you're not good enough. It's always critiquing us, right? You're not good enough. You can't do this. You shouldn't be doing this. You just are not designed to do that. and though it's really annoying, it's actually there for our protection. 10,000 years ago, we came out of the caves. One person said to the other, hey, listen, it's a beautiful day. Why don't we go over those hills and see what's on the other side? And the other person said, are you crazy? We have no support network. All these animals out there can kill us. Enemy tribes, people who we know nothing about. It's certain death. But the other person didn't listen. He said, I'm going to try it out. And he did. And he never came back. And he never passed his genes on. So we all ended up with this negative voice in our head as a result.
Yeah.
That actually helped us survive in that environment. We're in a modern environment where, nobody's going to try and kill us in most situations. No animals are going to eat us. We can find resources relatively easily or relatively quickly if we need to. But every time we want to try something new, the voice says, we're not really designed for it. We shouldn't do it. It's too risky. It's too big. We are not good enough. And it only increases the level of uncertainty we feel. So it's important for us to understand that voice, to acknowledge its origin, to say, thank you very much for allowing me to survive through the millennia. but now I'm gonna go over the side and see what's on the other side of the hill.
So it's a
So
survival tactic, basically.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Everything that happens to us, good or bad, inside our operating system, it's there to help us survive. It's just that some things today are not as relevant to our situation, and we need to understand that. And the moment we understand that, we think, okay, that's all it is. 10,000 years ago, that voice would save my life. Today, it's wrecking it because it's holding me back.
It's doing a little too much.
Yes, overprotective.
You also, you
Now,
also
the other,
talk. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah,
You didn't mention the other
gonna-
one.
now we all feel uncertainty and anxiety in our lives. These are things which, again, are there to help us survive potentially difficult situations. Being able to acknowledge those emotions, being able to understand their source, embrace them, and then move on from them is key to controlling them as opposed to them controlling us.
Why do you think? Why do you think that is? Why do you think the uncertainty holds us back so much?
That's an easy question to answer, but it has a certain amount of complexity. So let's start with the easy part first. The brain and the body are fully integrated, but they have one thing in common. They're both designed to help us survive, because if either of them fails at a task, we're dead. We can't live without a brain, and certainly the brain cannot live without a body. But this is how they accomplish this task. They have different skill sets. The brain is a predictive machine. It tries to help us survive by using all that computational power it has, which is magnificent, to try to predict the next moment. And the better it can predict the next moment, the better prepared we are, the better we know how to behave, the better we know how to navigate it, which means that we actually then can definitely survive it. And in order to create that kind of predictive ability, it creates everything else what we just talked about. It creates trust. It creates civilization. It creates traditions. It creates laws. It allows us to create legislature. It creates all those things which make sure that, hey, we're physically safe, and in most contexts, we have a fairly good idea of what's going to happen next. So that's how the brain does that. And the body only has one task, again, in this thing, which is to adapt. It adapts to the environment. If you're to go and live in the mountains of Norway, and you had to climb up and down those mountains and the fjords and everything, and if your life as a farmer is digging into hard earth because it's an hospitable environment with few resources, which means that occasionally you're going to have to fight your neighbors for those resources, well, then you become a fearsome Nordic warrior. You don't mean to be, but that's how it happens. And if you live in the steppes of Russia, or what is now Russia, you become Mongol rider because you use a horse to get across, and you don't need to sort of climb anywhere, but you're really, really good on horseback, and you learn to be good with a bow and arrow because that's your primary weapon. So we take the brain's predictive ability, we take the body's adaptive ability, and if we fashion an environment where those two things work well together, that's great and it'll help. But if we don't, and all we can feel is uncertainty, then the brain can't function, then we feel fear, then we feel anxiety, then we have the physical symptoms of fear and anxiety. Chronic stress, which brings illness, all those things, because the brain can't adequately understand what the next moment will be. So it lives in a constant state of panic. And the body can't adapt because it doesn't know what to adapt to. So it also lives in a constant state of panic. And they both get ill. We get mental illness, we get anxieties, we get massive stress, we get all sorts of things going wrong with our cognitive functions, and certainly our physical functions don't work properly.
It's like that triggers the fight or flight response, but it aims more toward just flight and basically do nothing.
Yeah, I mean, what happens? We go into this fight or flight response constantly without a credible threat. It's like if your house alarm goes off. If it goes off one night and you wake up, there's a problem, right? But if it keeps going off every single night, The problem is not outside. The problem is with the alarm.
Mhm.
And what happens? You're not going to get a good night's sleep. And after a while, your health is going to suffer because of that. So that's a very good analogy. We have this alarm going off without a threat, and the problem is the alarm, not the potential threat.
Let's talk about present bias, how basically we seek the smaller, easy reward versus the longer, uncertain reward. So, why do you think that's so prevalent in our brains or in our way of living?
Because exactly for the same things we just discussed, right? The body and the brain are there to help us survive. If we take the equation for survival, what does that equation look like? This is what it looks like. The amount of energy required to go through this moment is less than the amount of energy that we actually put in. So our output is always less. So we're trying to minimize the output, trying to find the easiest path forward, because if we constantly expand a lot of energy for things, more energy we're getting in, we're not going to survive. It's as simple as that. So when we take this into the context of an everyday situation, and I give you 3 choices, and choice number 1 is just like that. Choice number 2 is going to be a little bit hard, and choice number 3, that'll give you the best outcome possible, but you're going to have to work for it. Everybody's natural inclination is to go for choice number 1 because it's just so quick and so easy. And when are you not going to go for choice number 1? When emotionally, for your reasons which are unique to you, because you've worked them out for yourself, you want the best possible outcome. And then you'll say, hey, you know what? I'm going to go for choice number 3, even though it's going to be hard. But because you have that emotional connection, this is what happens now. Your brain takes this into account, recalculates that equation, and says, you know what? The value of the outcome now is pretty high because you have that emotional connection. So the cost of the activity, which is going to also be high, is acceptable. Why do we train so hard? We train so hard because emotionally, what we get out of the training means more to us than the amount of energy we spend in the training session. And if we don't have that emotional connection, then what do? We start training, we get tired, and then we cheat, and we take breaks, and then we take a couple of days off because we don't have that emotional connection. All we can feel is, oh, this is a stressor. Why am I doing it again? I'm okay.
What's the importance, right? When training, you mentioned pain and gain, but aside from that, how the mind body connection when it comes to getting stronger, faster, more athletic, more explosive. Why is that so important? That mind body connection.
The mind-body connection is important in any kind of physical movement because you can't really move your body without your brain being sort of implicated intimately in that. But if we're looking for very specific physical attributes like speed, strength, then there are different pathways to actually develop those. Now, obviously, there's a physical one. If you want your muscles to be fast, you got to develop a particular type of twitch action fiber, and there's specific exercises which will help you do that. If you want your muscles to be strong, you need to have specific size of muscles depending on the task you're doing, and specific strength for the tendons, and specific technique for all those things. But there's also the strength that comes from the mind-body connection, which is how strong are the signals that the brain sends to the body. And if the strength of those signals is sufficiently strong, then you have disproportionate strength, disproportionate speed for the physicality that you have developed. And we know there was an experiment done by Essex University in 2023, so it's fairly recent. Essex University is in the United Kingdom. So what they did is they took sprinters and they tested them over 60 yards. Now, 60 yards, sprinting is a brutal sport because it's such a short distance. Any tiny mistake is going to cost you the race. So you need to be 100% there. So they said to them, okay, we're going to test you over 60 yards. Now, 60 yards, all sprinters are pretty much the same, right? So you have, because sprinting is basically 3 parts to it. It's about the first 30 meters, which is your start and you explode off the blocks. And you have another 30 meters, which is about your 60-yard mark when you accelerate. And then you have the final 40 meters, which when you watch the sport on TV, it appears like the winner accelerates. But what's happening in those 40 meters is everybody's decelerating. And the winner is the person who decelerates the slowest. And he appears to accelerate. Wow. So up to the 60-yard mark, they're pretty much the same. And they took those sprinters, they took a group of 45 sprinters, and they said, they split them up in 23 and 22, and they said, you guys, we're going to test you, so we want your A game. And that's all they said to them.
Wow.
And then they took the other guys and they said, look, what we want you to do is when you get off your starting blocks, we want you to visualize being a rocket or a steam train or sort of a bullet. You know, sort of cartoonish stuff, which they had to hold in their head. And this is what happened. The people who had this mental imagery improved their sprinting speed between 3 and 5%, which is crazy.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and we don't truly understand why. We have a number of theories. Now, theory number one says, okay, they had this imagery in their head, they modeled it, and part of their brain accepted part of the attributes that are attributed to the speed, to the bullet and the rocket ship and all this, and boom, they were able, through the neural connection, to be faster. But the other theory, which is also valid, is that by keeping an image in their head, they were able, they needed to split their brain, their brain's resources now into 2 parts. One part maintains the image. The other part is dealing with the race. But because we split the resources, the amount of anxiety that they feel with pre-race nerves begins to drop. So now the baseline in terms of blood pressure and heartbeat and cortisol levels is a lot lower. And because it's a lot lower, it's like having more revs on the clock. So it's like, you know, if you have a car and it redlines at 10,000 revs, and my car redlines at 5,000 revs, and we start off at 3,000 revs, now you have 7,000 more revs before you hit your red line, and only have 2. So you have more resources at your disposal. So basically, maybe by focusing on those things, they were able to bring down the baseline and start off at a much calmer state of being, which allowed them to get that improvement. And the third theory says that basically by imaging that whatever it was, the bullet, the steam train, the
rocket.
Yeah, the rocket, all those things. The brain allocated resources, more resources to the muscles, bringing up blood temperature, bringing in sufficient ATP fuel for the cells, and that allowed them basically to improve their physical performance. But whichever of those theories is actually true, and it could be an overlap. All of them could be potentially true to some extent. The point remains that they were able to improve their performance instantly. No other training took place, which is crazy.
Wow. That kind of reminds me of basically the sniper's mind when they're eyeing their target. You know, just bringing everything down. But what about that person that's all about the no pain, no gain lifestyle? Where's his head at or her head at? What are they thinking? Is there mind-body connection there when they're just training and to the point where they're injury prone?
Well, any kind of person who uses exercise, and I'm speaking from experience here, personal experience. When you use exercise as a coping mechanism, the process is more important than the outcome. So you're looking for the exhaustion that comes with exercise as opposed to a particular physical outcome which has to be managed in order to be achieved. So that's damaged behavior to some extent. It's a coping mechanism. It works in terms of we don't go off the rails mentally, but physically, we're burning up our body.
Creating that burnout.
Yeah.
Let's go to the 4 steps to great brain health. I mean, some of us pretty much know these, and the importance of sleep, exercise, nutrition, and being social. But it's 2025. People aren't sleeping well. Obesity is in the United States. Obesity is at a very high. We have access to pretty much any fast food restaurant before without even leaving your house. So so why having all of these in check is so crucial to longevity and being built to last.
Well, there are many technical reasons why we age. Some that have to do with genetic and some that have to do with lifestyle. Some that have to do with diet. But the fundamental reason why we age is because our body is not working at an optimal level. We have elevated stress levels, we have elevated cortisol levels. And cortisol, it does a number on us. Beyond the fact that it makes us anxious and stressful, it essentially breaks down the relationship of the energy pathways between carbohydrates and fats in our body. So we can't access our fat reserves when we need them. And we tend to eat something and immediately that goes from the bloodstream straight into fat because cortisol levels are elevated. We can't put on muscle because our testosterone levels are down and protein breaks down at that level. So these are things which have very negative effects on our health, not just in the short term, but certainly in the long term, because as we get older, the fundamental building blocks, the cells of our body, are a little bit weaker, have a little bit smaller capacity to recover, smaller capacity to regenerate, smaller capacity to produce work. And we have to then strategize better how to make them function for us. It's like having an old car. You get a brand new car, you get on the motorway, you put your foot down, you have not a care in the world. It will actually do what you want it to do. You have a car which is a classic car. If you haven't done a lot of work on it already, if you've just taken the motorway, put your foot down, 9 times out of 10 it's going to break down. So that's the same analogy. As we get older, we need to keep inflammation low in our bloodstream, well, throughout our body. So systemic inflammation needs to drop. We need to make sure cholesterol levels are down. We need to make sure our cardiovascular system is up. Excuse me. I'm battling with a cough. I'm sorry about that.
All right.
So you need to make sure that our muscles, which tend to waste away as we get older at a rate of about 8 to 10% over a period of 10 years after we get past the age of 40, if we don't do work, they will go away. Now, all of those things, all of them, are responses of the body trying to protect us, which go wrong in that context, right? We lose muscles because as we get older, because the body thinks, okay, you're getting older, you're going to have fewer successful hands. So I'm trying to make sure that you don't have massive energy need. So the fewer hands allow you to survive. But we're not in that world now. We're in a world where we want to live to the age of 90. And at that age, we want to be able to enjoy life. We want to be able to get out of bed without hurting ourselves. We need to feel our body without aching. We need to be able to make sure that life itself feels good because we enjoy our body. Excuse me.
Sorry.
So in order for those things to happen, we have to create the necessary conditions. And we know for a fact the body is an adaptive machine. We know that. And they carried out tests in Japan where they have the largest number of non-octogenarians in the world. That's people living over the age of 90. And they took subjects which were aged 95, and from my perspective, somewhat ambitiously, they put them through a 3-year training program to improve their 100-meter sprint. And they actually did.
Oh, wow.
They put on muscle at age 95. So by 98, 3 years later, they were faster. And they were like 98, 3 years older, but let me repeat it, 98.
That's crazy.
So Yeah, so if the body can do that at 98, it can certainly do it at 40 and 50 and 60, definitely. But it will not do it if we don't actually do something about it. And what do? We need to move it, we need to feed it, and we need obviously to move it the right way, feed it the right things. We need to repair it by sleeping properly, sleeping in good quality sleep. It doesn't matter if you don't get 8 hours, as long as you actually get 6, 7 really good hours. And then the last thing, which is for the brain, is we need to socialize. This is not being a party animal, right? It's actually having meaningful social connections with people that allow the brain to calibrate itself to an acceptable level of operation.
It's they say that, that the lack of social activity, or if just the feeling of loneliness, can actually lead to poor health and
Yes.
death, which is amazing. Now, what if someone, they eat well, they exercise, they have a great social life, but they sleep horribly? Can you have three and not have one, and kind of get past that mark in life?
It's an interesting theoretical question. There are two things to this. First of all, you need to ask why. If everything else is okay, why isn't this okay?
Okay.
What's the problem? And the second thing is that all these things are kind of related. If you have good physical regime in your life, so you're moving regularly, if you're watching your diet, if your social life is up to scratch, then the anxiety levels are going to be down, your stress levels are going to be down, your biomarkers are going to be younger than your chronological age, so your sleep ought to be better automatically, right? So, that's how they go. It's difficult sometimes to get all four of these things perfect. So I always say, you fix what you can, move forward from there, and improve things incrementally instead of trying to tackle everything at once, because
Over
that's too
time.
much. Yeah, nobody can do it.
That's interesting. I mean, I take pride in knowing that the first three are top notch for me. I socialize, but I'm kind of a homebody, so it's hard for me to get out there and kind of want to be friendly. But okay, so let's talk about this. The inevitable death is inevitable, right? You mentioned you mentioned
Yes.
death, and you mentioned this Tom Brokaw book, The Greatest Generation, and he talks about
Mm.
basically the post-war era and how
Mm.
basically humans, to a certain degree, started thriving. But for me, I think when I was reading that part, it kind of made me think of, could this be like the birth of hustle culture? How nowadays everything is about attaining and chasing and saying, I'll sleep when I die. I'm gonna attain this. I want all this money. I want this career. So let's talk about that. Like,
Yes, let's talk about it. Okay, and first of all, you're right to some extent. The work ethic that has led to the hustle culture, that has led to the totally inappropriate I'll sleep when I die, which I also used to use, right? So I use the same thing.
yeah.
So, the things that we say to ourselves to justify burning the candle at both ends come from that generation that achieved so much. At the same time, that generation achieved so much because they had a unique perspective. They were near the Second World War experience. They saw firsthand, or close enough, real hardship. And that changes your value system. It changes how you value things. They were able to build not just for themselves, but for those coming after them. So the perspective was long. They tried to do the right thing, whatever that was in any context, because that was energetically sustainable. And I'll explain this. Let's say you and I agree that we live in a culture, we create a culture where winner takes all, because you and I are confident the winner will be one of us, or maybe both of us. And we don't care about everybody else, right? So if we live in a culture, what is our life going to be like? Energetically, really exhausting, because It doesn't matter if you and I are near the apex of that culture. Everybody else around us is trying to get there, and we're trying to keep them down. So we're spending a lot of energy just trying to stay afloat in that environment. But suppose we have an environment which says, meritocracy is important, cooperation is important, giving people a helping hand is important. What if we just accept these three things? What have we done immediately, even if we do nothing else? First of all, we've taken the edge off, thinking, okay, I'm pretty confident I'm good enough, and you think the same, so meritocratically we'll rise. But if somebody's better than us, well, they're better than us. We can't do anything else. We'll do everything we can to be as good as possible. So we'll take it to the limit, and we're okay with it because we've taken to the limit. If we say that, we create a kind of safety net for everybody, that also takes the edge of failure. You fail, well, you're not going to die because you created that. So energetically now, everything is there. And if we cooperate, we know instantly that cooperation makes us stronger. We exchange ideas, we exchange data, we exchange resources. So suddenly we don't feel so alone. So just on those three things, we change the society. And we changed what? Our cost of living energetically. We made life easier for ourselves. So that's the generation that created all those things for those specific reasons, because they saw how hard life can be. We're like 80 years away from there. You and I know that hustle culture exists, that people are sometimes driven only by money, that we use money as the only metric of success and will not take anything else. And these things are there because we have lost sight of that. And it's not making us any happier. Sometimes we reach the apex. We get as successful as we can possibly be. And it's still not enough. We don't feel fulfilled. We don't feel happy. We don't feel that the struggle was truly worth it. And we wonder why. What is it we're missing? It's that. It takes too much energy. Yeah.
It was never what you thought it was to begin with. That's the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's also one of those things where not everyone's okay with being surpassed by someone better than them. It's survival of the fittest, and we live in a very competitive world society where everyone just wants to be at the top alone. Not everyone out there wants to lend a helping hand, unfortunately. But that has to create a lot of mental burnout as well, right?
Yes, we're seeing it. Not only burnout, but it creates a lot of mental problems. We're seeing anxiety in people, and mental and behavior, which is kind of mentally warped, for lack of a better word, in people who have no right to have that because they have tremendous resources at their fingertips, and they appear to be successful by almost any metric you care to apply. So we know that there needs to be a better way. And this is how we always create the better way. We need to experience the bad way. We need to experience the burnout. We need to see hustle culture fail. We need to see the epitome of riches not being enough to create a happy, balanced human being. And once we see that, then we begin to recalibrate.
It's like a song where someone says, if it wasn't for bad luck, I wouldn't have luck. So, so
Well, there you go.
all right. So you also mentioned this was actually really interesting. I never knew this. So Kathy Willis, her Good Nature, she talks about patients who basically are in less pain or in overall better health with a God-in view versus the patient that doesn't have that like beautiful view. Now,
Yes.
can you explain that? Like what happens in the brain where it sees the garden and it's like,
yes, well, as a matter of fact, I mean, until very recently, we weren't 100% sure. A study came out just last month, which highlights something we didn't know. The researchers used 175 different patients, and they tested for sensory perception, which is what happens when we actually look at a beautiful view or experience a nice sort of nature environment. What I saw is that if we have our senses aroused by the input of the natural world, there are neural pathways in the brain that light up, and they all light up at the same time equally. And then they go through a particular processing center of the brain that actually changes the wiring of the brain itself. And we don't 100%, well, we don't know the implications of that physically because we just had the test results. But this is where I will just take an educated guess. We feel pain, which is a subjective experience. It's essentially a signal the body sends to the brain of discomfort, and the brain processes it to different degrees of pain. And if we can activate other parts of the brain to create a different sensory perception, we are reframing part of that signal and perhaps even dampening it down in terms of its value. So when it comes to pain management, how we feel about a situation in terms of where we are, how we perceive the world around us, how we perceive ourselves in that world, even how happy we feel, is going to make a big difference in how strongly we feel the pain that we experience.
And yeah, when you have that garden view mentality, that energy radiates in the room or wherever you are.
Yes.
And you attract that same energy, which is amazing.
It's that reframing, right?
Yeah.
It's exactly that.
With everything said, everything we experience in life, everything we do, everything we go through, is it safe to say that it begins and ends in the mind?
The mind is all. At the same time, there's no mind without the body. So if we're to say, where does the mind begin and where does it end? Well, the same can be said of the body. They're so intricately linked that there's no separating one from the other. We are just one.
Wow. So Built to Last is out right now, Amazon. Where else can people buy it? By the way, it's almost sold out on Amazon.
I know. They'll get a few more copies in, I hope.
All right, so amazing. I love it. Beautiful. Now let's talk about, am I saying this right? Derby? The D-A-R-E?
Derby, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, Derby. What is is it a workout? Is it a workout platform? Is it an app?
Derby is a global fitness resource, which is crowdfunded. Mm-hmm. It is staffed mainly by volunteers. There's a core group of people who run it, and myself included these days. Its principle is to make high quality fitness advice, fitness information, high quality workouts which have been field tested, and high quality programs available to anyone, anywhere, at zero cost to them. And the principle behind it is that fitness is a right, not a privilege. You shouldn't have to pay a gym membership or to access a paywall or to spend money on clothes or on equipment if you can't in order to get fit. We all have the right to be fit. We just need good exercise, basic information, and some place to do it. And Derby covers everything. If you have equipment, it shows there's some workouts for equipment. If you don't have equipment, a lot of body weight workouts. They all get field tested with volunteer groups around the world. It takes about anywhere between 3 and 6 weeks for a workout to go from the drawing board through to rounds of testing and refining to actually being published on the website. And we have a pipeline of these things now. So we bring out about 4 workouts a week between Monday and Friday.
Wow, that's amazing.
And programs take anywhere between 6 and 12 months. And we were the first ones to truly bring out RPG fitness, where you have a role play in fitness, which helps basically create an immersive environment that engages your brain as well as your body. And some of those RPG fitness programs actually have a strong moral element, because the choices you make as you go through the exercises actually affect both the outcome of the story, but also the cost to you. And when we did Hero's Journey, for instance, there's somebody had to help and you didn't because you were in a hurry to get somewhere. And then when you encounter the next threat, you didn't have something that person could have given you. So now you had to work twice as hard. So there are implications for that.
Oh, that's amazing. Being that you're in that space, the fitness space, martial arts, you've done martial arts all your life, and this is a wellness podcast, mental and physical. What is your training like? Run me through a week of your training? What does it consist of?
Well, I'm 60 now, so I'm aware that one of the things I need to focus on more is strength training. I train 3 times a week doing primarily strength exercises. And then 3 times a week when I do martial arts based exercises and sparring and bug work. And then I devote one entire day to stretching. And I use stretching every time I do martial arts. I do stretching every time I do strength training. But that one day is stretching from beginning to end. So I do a 2-hour session.
Oh, I also want to add your book, Built to Last, just for the people listening or watching, does have a series of workouts and mobility that they can do. So
yeah,
that's
it does. Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you for
so,
mentioning that. Yeah.
so that's more of a
And
reason
then they're
for
all
them.
customizable. You can
Yeah.
do them to your level. It has 3 levels: level 1, level 2, and level 3. So you actually pick the level you want to do. And if you don't have time, there are workouts that just last 2 minutes, and you can actually do those.
Yeah, I actually came across that one. But all right, so your fitness, you mentioned that. What about your nutrition? You mentioned a lot about, inflammation and keeping it down, and as you age, especially. So, what is your nutrition like?
I'm vegan. I've been vegan since 2016.
I am as well.
Okay, perfect. So it was a steep learning curve for me because I had to learn to cook differently. I had to learn to approach food differently. I had to think about pretty much all the elements of nutrition in a completely different way. So, but personally, it's really worked for me. So my nutrition now is, what I found is that my recovery time is a little bit faster. And certainly I have had fewer injuries over the past 4 or 5 years.
You're also training smart as well. You're training smartly.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, this is the other thing that I used to use exercise sometimes as a tool to exhaust my body so that my brain could quieten down. And that's a crazy way of doing it.
It is.
Because it invites injury. So these days, I try to be a good coach to myself. I maintain a very even keel in how I approach training, in the number of repetitions. But what I do is I actually track everything. I track all my workouts. I track what I did the day before and the day before that and the day before that. So I set very realistic targets. And also I monitor how I feel. So if I'm feeling exhausted, for instance, in the past, I would try to push through that. And that's not a very good thing to do. So if I feel exhausted, I will simply switch to some kind of other activity, still do something, but not as energetic. And that helps me recover faster.
Your book came at the perfect time because that's something that I'm battling with, training smart and not exerting myself and pretty much being too burnt out to do anything else. So thank you for releasing this book.
Yeah.
All right, so
welcome.
We're nearing the end of this conversation. I think this is amazing. So obviously you have content out there. You have your Instagram, your YouTube, TikTok, etc. So where can people find you if they want to get in contact with you, if they want to be a part of the Derby community, etc., buy your book? Where can they find you?
Okay. You'll find me on my website, davidamerland.com. I put all the stuff out there. If you Google me, you'll find all my socials. I get really excited. I follow all the studies. I get excited by the new things that come out. I publish a lot of stuff to share my excitement, and hopefully somebody will benefit from that knowledge and become better in what they do. Derby can be found at derby.com. That's DAREBEE.com. And there's a very strong support community from all over the world in the forum, which we call the Hive sometimes. People have logs and they sort of log their training to make themselves accountable. They ask questions and people help them because there's no such thing as a truly unique problem. Somebody else has faced something similar, and they can pool resources and try to understand it better. So it's quite a thriving community, and it sometimes can make the difference because you don't have to feel alone, even if you train at home.
Definitely. And it's at David Amerland on Instagram, correct? Which
It is,
is
yes, absolutely. Yeah.
probably the most common where everyone is. I do have one final question that I do ask
Okay.
everyone. Are you mentally fit?
I try to be. Now, this is a difficult one because the brain, we can test the body. We can see where we are. We can remember what we used to be like. We can set metrics. We can set performance parameters and actually see where our fitness lies. But where does our mental fitness lie? For that, we need to have others to help us calibrate our behavior. This is where the social element comes in. I use a small rule for myself, which kind of guides me into the way I think and the way I operate. And what I say is that the things which I do, I try to do as little harm as possible and leave only good memories behind. And I try very hard to live by that.
Wow. You're doing that as a vegan, right? You're not harming any animals.
Yes.
Believe it or not, when you have that that mentality or just that lifestyle where you're not harming anything or consuming anything that was harmed, it changes your way of thinking and your way of
Yes.
increases your empathy. For me, that I've been since 2017, so
Okay.
I totally could resonate with that. So yeah, Built to Last is out now. Your latest book, davidamerland.com. If you want to check anything out, therapy.com. If you want to get on that site and join. David, this was amazing. I had a great time. I learned a
Anthony,
lot.
thank you so much for having me here for this opportunity. It was brilliant. Thank
Thank you,
you.
sir. Enjoy your day. Enjoy your weekend. God bless.
You too.